Hey everyone, welcome back to Rally Caps. It's a podcast for artists, entrepreneurs, and everybody in between. I'm Steven.
I'm Gene.
And today we have a very special guest, our dear friend and co-owner of Creative Club Chicago, Mr. Braxton Wallace.
This is such a monumental day in my career. I would like to thank my mom, my dad. Without you guys, I would never be here.
I feel like if anyone listening has followed any one of us for any amount of time, you know Braxton as well. I think this is your first time on the show, though,
Yeah,
right?
it's my first time on the show.
Yeah.
But
This is your first time on the show?
Yeah, it is.
Oh,
But you've probably seen me somewhere.
Yes.
You know, we've done so much stuff together.
Yeah. My guy's sporting some fresh ink over there as well.
we are.
It's healing very nicely.
Shout out Felix.
Yep. Very good work.
Love
and
him.
Mr. Christian Watson, who designed your tattoo.
Yeah,
Super
1924
cool.
US.
Yeah.
Plug.
Very neat. Very beautiful. Such good work. Guys, I'm really excited for today's
Me
episode.
too.
We
too.
were just saying before we started recording that it feels like we have been practicing this exact episode
Yes.
for the last couple months because that's exactly what's been going on. That is the theme of today's episode.
This is
right?
all we've talked about for the last like 3 weeks,
It's
4
true.
weeks.
Yeah. And when we say we mean the three of us, which is why Braxton is joining us on today's episode, because we've had this conversation so many times, we figured it just made sense to sit down and record it on camera, on mic, and kind of flesh some of these thoughts out a little bit more, share them with you. As you might have guessed from the title of the episode, we are talking about cameras and gear to a certain degree. Specifically some kind of older digital cameras, some new camera systems that we are diving into. But largely, I would say there's a pretty deep philosophical component to all of it. None of these decisions are really made because we're bored or we need new gear, but I think it's reflective of where the three of us are at in our individual careers right now, kind of reassessing the tools that we're using for certain things, the type of work that we're taking on in the first place. And regardless of what side you fall on, like the gear matters, gear doesn't matter conversation, I think it does matter in so much as it does influence the way that you can shoot, and the tools that you use will either help or detract from the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
So it's important to consider it carefully and to have these conversations. So that's what we're doing today. Top level, Gene, could you give us a little bit of context for where this conversation kind of started and maybe where you specifically were at, where it came to your work, photo work specifically going into this year, how you were feeling about it, and why the three of us in particular started talking about these things?
Yeah. So for context, at one point in our careers so far, we were all Canon shooters or are still Canon shooters. And Braxton first made the switch away from Canon before you and I. And that was a couple years ago.
That was, I think, June would make a year. It's been almost
Last June.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last June. So it's been almost a year that I've been completely independent of Canon.
Yeah. And for me at least, because we talked about this before, right? But I have decided to make the switch away from Canon for a few different reasons. But top level, really addressing video. And so I got the Sony FX3. And for me, it just didn't make a ton of sense to invest in a bunch of Sony glass and still keep all of my Canon RF glass. Yep. And then the other thing too was I've been shooting Canon my entire career and I just wanted to switch things up. That's the honest truth is there's no actual issues or like limitations with my Canon gear, but I just was bored. And so that boredom led to really kind of forcing myself to reevaluate my creativity and my gear at the beginning of this year. And so I made the pretty drastic change of offloading basically all my Canon gear. And then at that point, I already had the FX3. And then medium format was something that I wanted to get into. And I thought, why not just do it now? I'm not shooting as many weddings. I don't need speed. And so I got the GFX 100S, which has been a great camera. And then I still wanted something to, I think, pair with my work that'd be a daily carry that wasn't film. One of the reasons why I was in that kind of thought process was because although I love shooting film, with the type of work that I'm currently working on right now and building a portfolio around, I needed more consistency around color. And again, like even though film is so much fun, I wanted a camera to pair with my GFX that'd be smaller in form, easy to carry around. And so after a lot of research and talking to some friends, I landed on the Ricoh GR2. And so currently that is my setup, the GFX 100S, the Ricoh GR2, and then I have a Sony A7R4 that I will really just reserve for weddings. But for me, it really was like I just wanted to switch things up. And even though the GFX is more cumbersome, it's slower than my previous R5. It has definitely like stimulated something like creatively, but also just there's something about learning a new tool, even though it's so familiar to me, like shutter speed and all that stuff. But definitely, like every time I hit the menu system, it requires a little more thinking than it did with my gear that I've been using for 10 years. So that's kind of the beginnings of why I started to transition to different form factors for gear. Yeah.
And Braxton was a pretty enormous help in that.
I would say so.
Conversation.
Yeah. Because I've always done a pretty even split of photo video, but being a Canon shooter, it's very apparent that Canon has not taken the video side of things as seriously as other manufacturers. And as my workload began to progressively get more and more video heavy, I definitely needed a system that kind of supported that more. So so after that, I switched over to Lumix and Leica because I still do a lot of photo work as well. Ended up now I'm pretty much Lumix full time now. But what started it for me was actually, I've been a big film shooter my entire life. I feel like I'm actually one of the few of my age that still learned on film. Not many people do that anymore. But I've always been very vocal about how much I don't like 35 millimeter. I don't love the scans. I've very rarely in my life have I ever shot a roll of 35 millimeter and I was like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. Like, oh, these results are fantastic. Like hardly ever. A lot of times like, oh, this is so much like chroma noise, or it's like, my biggest thing is that, especially compared to someone who shoots a lot of 6x7, and we're all shooting a lot of 6x7 now. Once you start shooting 6x7 and you see those negatives, you just never want to shoot 35 millimeter again. You just truthfully.
Yeah. And
so in a lot of my photo work, I'm still shooting a lot of 6x7, but I wanted something to pair with that very similarly to Gene. That, kind of shored up the difficulties of 6x7. It's very large, it's very cumbersome, it's not very practical for everyday use or more casual use. Like you're not going to just like go take, if you're hanging out with your family, you just want to do some like document your life photos, like you're not going to do that on the Pentax 6.7, but at the same time, like, also, I found myself a lot of the times when I was shooting 35 millimeter and I was shooting more casual things, I found myself like either letting the roll sit on my shelf and I forgot about it, or like I'd send it to the lab, I'd get scans back, or, for the longest time, we weren't even getting scans. We were just getting them developed and camera scanning ourselves. Half the time I would never scan them, or I would scan them and then they would sit in a Lightroom catalog. Like I would never do anything with the images. And you couple that with, I never really liked the results. I was like, I need to find something different, which led me, for those who are watching, led me to this, which is the Leica Q. But again, very similar use case to what Gene's been doing with the Ricoh.
So I'll give just brief context because I think my story is the least complicated. I've been shooting Canon for 10 years and I technically still am. And that's it. That's it. I haven't made any huge switches yet. Like Gene and Braxton both mentioned, Gene has picked up the Ricoh GR2. Brax has the original Leica Q. I will talk about the camera that I had kind of found that was like an in-between of those two cameras a little later on in the episode, because I purchased it, had it for a week, and have returned it already, actually.
Rip.
I know, rip. It was a very cool camera. I'll talk about it more specifically in a little bit, but something I do want to touch on is kind of what both of you guys are alluding to is film is becoming a little bit less of a priority.
Yes.
And we are trying to, I think in some senses, just bring joy back into digital photography.
Yes. Yeah.
It's kind of the general feeling that I think the three of us have been harping on these past few months. That's what the conversations have really been circling around. Is like, how do we enjoy this and kind of replicate the same feeling that film gives us, specifically 35.
Yes.
Still shooting plenty of medium format film, but 35, I think especially, has been replaced a little bit by these not vintage digital. They're not that old, but they are older.
But they're older.
They're older, and they definitely show their age compared to the AI-powered cameras that we're starting to see now. It's a very different shooting experience, even though they're 10, 12 years old. Actually, when was the GR2 released? Was that
2015?
Oh, that's more recent.
It's a 9-year-old
than I thought.
camera.
That was
And it was 2016.
2016.
I believe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the camera that I returned was actually the oldest of this bunch. Okay.
Yeah, yours was
That's
like 2012.
right?
2012.
It was the RX1.
Yeah.
Wow.
We'll censor that out so no one knows.
Oh yeah, we're talking about that later. It was a beep.
Yes, you can hear that.
Yes. No. So that, what do you guys feel in that regard, as far as restoring some kind of joy in digital photography?
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I still, as a medium, love shooting film the most. It's from like a just like a reward perspective. I just love that you have to really work for it. I mean, like we can go on and on about film, but really the reason why I'm not deviating away from film, but the reason why I'm doing a lot more digital work really is like, the honest answer is, with my Leica M6, that was the first camera I had that I bought a 28 millimeter lens for. And so I didn't even see the world compositionally in 28 for the longest time. I didn't even understand what that meant to like photograph on like 28 millimeters. And so even when I picked up this camera, which is a 28 millimeter equivalent, that was really because of the M6 and the shooting experience there. But like the cool thing about film, at least for the past 3 years for me, was it was pure enjoyment. I was able to monetize it, but like from the onset, the goal was never necessarily to monetize it. It was just to learn the medium and then have a lot of fun. And I really think that although I'm not necessarily in that place in my business anymore where I don't feel like I have as much leisure time and flexibility to just like shoot film whenever I want to, like I'm like, now it's time to like get back to grinding and focus on the business and really build a new portfolio. But so much of how I shoot now, 3-4 years later from like really getting into film, was so heavily informed by shooting film. And so again, for me, it's not like, oh, film sucks, or like, even if it's expensive, I'll still shoot it. But it's just that in this current like intersection of my interest and with my actual work, I'm just prioritizing my work right now, and digital is just easier in that regard to curate it, be more consistent. So that's really the reason for me, at least.
Yeah. And for me, like it's still strictly almost for the most part. I mean, a little bit is like professional reasoning, but most of it really just has to do with my disinterest in 35 millimeter.
Yeah.
Just never really liked it. It never really lent itself to my photographic style and the things I like to photograph. My biggest complaint with 35 millimeter, and I've had this conversation before, I think I actually mentioned this on a previous podcast, but there's no room to live within the frame of 35 millimeter, if that makes sense. There's no real detail in the 35 millimeter frame. You know, I think 35 millimeter lends itself very well to people like, say, a Chris Chu or a Joe Greer, like street photographers. Street photographers tend to, at least in their style of street photography, there tends to be like very like single subject, if that makes sense. And there's not to be derogatory about the images, but there's not a lot else in the frame that matters, if that makes sense. Like if you go and like look at like Joe's work, you know, he's photographing touch, he's photographing, you know, color palettes, he's photographing like interesting people on the streets, but it's all about that one person, and then anything else in the background doesn't really matter. And I think that's where 35 millimeter really shines, where you can have a single subject and that's all you really care about, and you can see them well enough. But like, for example, like I've been working on a photo book of the state of Mississippi for a really long time. And there was too many times where like, there's been several times where I'm photographing that entire book on mostly 6x7 film. And, you know, I'll take a photograph and then I'll get the scans back and look at it, and I'll see something in the background. And I'm like, oh, I didn't notice that. Like it can be anything from like some indirect correlation between like a light post and a mailbox, or like opposing colors, like on the opposite sides of the frame or something like that. In 6x7, like you have room within the frame to live. Like I always hearken it to like, go watch a movie like in IMAX and you go watch a movie like in standard projection. When you go watch a movie in IMAX, the frame is so big and there's so much detail. Like you can live within that frame. Like you can see, you know, the subject of the frame, but also you can see the stuff in the background. You can see the stuff up here. You can see the little things that like you might not catch so much. And like the same thing can be said for weddings. Like a lot of my professional photo work is weddings, and you know, being able, you know, I have a very documentary style when it comes to weddings, and being able to like, yeah, like I'm photographing, say like the bride and her sister hugging, but then if you look in the corner and you saw the whole time that like mom was like crying out of the side of her eye or something like that, like it's those things like that that you can't really capture very well with 35 millimeter. There's just like, truthfully, there's not enough detail. I mean, I think mathematically film's got more resolution than digital, but we don't have the scanning technology to really pull that out, I would say, probably.
Sure.
So, and then like I said earlier, like never really doing anything with the film. Like a lot of times, like I was just like spending money to never do anything with these photos. Like if I'm like out like with Gene, and typically I carry a camera with me everywhere, or like, you know, when we make our Trader Joe's walks, you know, we love to walk to Trader Joe's down the street, you know, and I see like an interesting like shadow or something. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna take a picture of this. But then like nothing ever gets done with that photo. And so when I started actually playing, and we can talk about this later if you want, but I actually tried out a lot of other cameras before I landed on the Q. And I found myself using those images, like being able to quickly send that image over to your phone and then either send it in the group chat, or like if you took a photo of like your sister or something like that, you can quickly send it over to her. And I was actually doing something with the images, and I was like, oh, this is just so much better than 35 millimeter, because you get that, you know, especially with the Q full frame, 24 megapixels, you have that kind of detail that you're looking for. But also, it doesn't cost anything to take photos. It's free, which is a huge plus.
It feels like such a hipster thing for us to be like, oh, it's so cheap to shoot digital. Everyone's like, yeah, no, we get it. We know that. We know for sure. But no, there is something about it. I think it was not necessarily a phase, but I think there was just a season where it was something that we were all very into together.
Yeah.
And there was a certain element of that togetherness that I think made it more exciting. And truthfully, I think reality has just set in a little bit more now. And especially considering the jumps that we want to make career-wise and the different pivots that we want to make business-wise, I think it just makes more sense to reprioritize a little bit, because that's the lens that we've been looking at a lot of things as a studio, like lately. It's been what stays and what goes. How can we be as objective as possible looking at these things?
Also, like, let's be so transparent for a minute. Like, the popularity of film has also decreased.
Oh,
I would
for sure.
say pretty heavily over the last like year and a half. There was a phase where, as long as the photo was taken on film, you would get a lot of attention. Like, truthfully, you would.
Yep.
And I feel like now that phase is kind of like died down, like, I would say, again, truthfully, like, there's less incentive to shoot film as well.
Yeah.
You know, especially for a lot of people, you know, like, if that's your thing, like, there's not, you know, even like, I've seen like in the wedding space, like less and less people are marketing themselves as film photographers. There was a span there where you could market yourself as like digital plus film or whatever, you know, I still have that in my bio, but you know, like that was like a super push thing for a while. And now even that's kind of come down a bit. And so like, there's less interest in it overall, and there's not as much, like, again, there's not much of as an incentive if like you're not being able to gain a whole lot from it other than self-satisfaction, if that makes sense.
Sure. Like if I think especially for maybe those who are doing it for the sake of Instagram attention or just a certain level of virality, there's definitely less of that now, which I think, I mean, could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. I don't know. I don't think there's a judgment value there, but I do think at the very least, those that still genuinely love it will just keep shooting it. And I feel like this year I'm going to take a lot of time to make film images that I'm really proud of.
Yes.
And not even necessarily share them, just kind of do it for myself. Which I think, again, it's just like indicative of what the future looks like for us. But yeah.
And I think there's an important distinction between like people like us and people like them. Like, I've always looked at it as like two different categories. You have like film photographers, which, like, when I hear film photographer, I think of people like, y'all follow like Expired Film Club on Instagram. Like, you might have seen their videos. He went super viral, especially during the pandemic. Like he would shoot like on like a Canon F1 or wherever that had like a top-up viewfinder. And he would shoot like expired film. They were like POV videos. He still makes them. They do really well. But someone like that who has committed to only shooting film, and like that's kind of their restriction, and that's what they do kind of regardless of subject matter, what they're shooting, results, etc. They just shoot film. Whereas I've kind of always identified myself as a photographer who just chooses to shoot film, if that makes sense. This is my medium of choice. I do it because of the results that it gives, and it's hard to replicate, especially like medium format film. It's hard to replicate that with digital, and that's why I shoot film. But it's never been like I only shoot film because film is film. You know, it was just that's what gave the best results at the time based on what I'm shooting. Whereas now, you know, what we're shooting, you know, economy, whatever, like that's changing a bit, and so now it kind of makes more sense to shoot digital.
Which is also another totally fair and valid reason. I think the three of us feel it as well. It is just so expensive.
Oh, it's so expensive.
It is so expensive. it's very tough. And I'm saying that even as someone who is taken care of very nicely by our friends over at Nice Film Club. Shout out to you guys. Even with that, it's still expensive. It is tough to justify sometimes. And that's a very present reality that I think should be discussed more. I think it's discussed plenty, but for those who kind of champion it, I think acknowledging how difficult it can be financially to afford that is it's just part of what we're living with.
Yeah.
And I actually, to your point, also, I think I like the way you described that with, you're a photographer who uses film for the certain circumstances where it makes sense. I think on a personal level, trying to really hone in on the work that I want to be creating this year. And I think a lot of that will be portraiture. And in that circumstance, I really do love film specifically for that, because of what you can achieve with larger formats that digital sensors can physically not accomplish, which is really fun. And having a clearer vision for what you're using it for, I think is really important. And again, it's all about like refining what we are doing here, right? Like I said at the beginning that this was a kind of philosophical conversation.
Yeah.
All of this camera talk has been a way for us to, I think, really hone in on what we want to be doing going forward. Because like I said, regardless of what side you fall on, whether you think gear matters or it doesn't or whatever, it is a tool that to a certain extent dictates what you are going to be able to do in a certain environment. Yeah. And so whether you are choosing intentionally to shoot 6x7 or large format film for something, you're not going to use that when a couple is recessing from their ceremony on a wedding day, Vice versa, you're not going to necessarily use a 600 millimeter lens for studio portraiture or something like, there's just like, there are obviously do whatever you want, but like there are certain use cases for these things for a reason, right? Like you need to understand why you're using the thing that you're using so that you can achieve the best possible result. I don't know. I think I like talking about this stuff a ton. I feel like the three of us have found each other for this chat because no one else in the studio cares at all.
Oh no, not at all. And everyone's like, please shut up.
Yeah, please stop talking about this. This is the fifth
So I
time
talk
this
about it
week.
more.
Yeah, exactly.
And on purpose in the room, even when you guys aren't there.
Gene just mumbles to himself too.
We're just going to play this episode on repeat at a very low level, but it's always going to be playing in the studio, so people can always listen to us talk about this. Gene, I feel like maybe wrestled the most with what the next step was going to be camera wise. Could you walk us through a little bit of the purchases that you made and then returned?
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I'm very conscious of how much money I'm spending or my business is spending. And so, kind of like with that boundary or working within that framework, I wasn't willing to like buy a Hasselblad X2D and like spend 10 grand. Like it just wasn't my, even if it were my interest, I wouldn't have allowed myself to do that. So when I began offloading all the Canon gear, at that point, I already made up my mind to go to Sony because of the FX3. So because the FX3 is so good, I was like, great. And I'll just pair it with the A7R5, a good photo camera that is very highly spoken of, and I'll just shoot Sony. But honestly, like with the FX3 too, I don't care about the body. I don't care about the ergonomics.
Yeah.
It's the image that I really like out of it. And that's why I like that camera so much, even though that camera is now considered older as well. So in the conversations of like, what's my photo camera then? Like this is while we were still discussing like medium format. I basically landed on getting the Sony A7R5, which is like their newest A7R camera. Watched a ton of videos, watched Benj's video. And honestly, right when did I have the Ricoh at that point? I don't know. I didn't.
No.
Right?
You just had that.
Did I have the GFX by then?
No,
Okay.
because
we had that whole conversation.
Because in a minute, I'm going to take credit for Gene getting the GFX.
Oh, no, that's right.
This was conversation number 8.
It was the
couch.
A7R5 first. Okay, so I remember I was like, okay, cool. I'll get the A7R5. Dope camera, spec'd out. And I remember I was home. I got the package. I was super excited. And I remember right when I opened the box, I took the camera out. I looked at it and I was like, yeah, I don't care. It was like, I had this moment of like, I don't care. And that's like really what I looked at it and I was like, wow, this thing is like spec'd out.
So uninspiring.
And I just don't care.
Yeah.
And so I remember like looking at it, I put it back in the box and I think I brought it to the studio the next day and like,
Gene could have cared less.
I just did not care. And it was like that moment where I realized, I don't actually care about the newest, shiniest thing. I just need a thing that I'm going to be excited about that will give me the results that I need for the work that I'm creating moving forward. And then we had the conversation.
Yes.
About,
me and Gene are very notorious for being Facebook Marketplace stalkers. I feel like
we see all the same listings
all the time.
You guys high-fived over seeing the same queue
yesterday.
All the time we will I will reference a listing or whatever, and Gene will like say some like niche detail and be like, "You saw that too," or whatever. Like he'll reference
the one that was
listing.
in Florida, or the one that was $2,200.
Yeah. Like we always see the same listings because we're both very big Facebook Marketplace stalkers, and we had both happened to see the same GFX 100S listing.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Yes, we both saw it, and I even texted it to Gene, and I was like, Gene, because Gene had talked about wanting to move to medium format, but he was like, "Oh, I'm probably about a year out. I probably won't do it right away, or whatever." And I see it, and I texted Gene. I was like, Gene, I think you should just do it. Like, and then like we ended up having like a very long conversation on the couch at the studio.
That's right. I remember this.
And I was like, Gene, if you know that you're already going to move to medium format in a year, and you've already been looking at specifically the GFX 100S, then why not go ahead and do it now? Like, there's no reason for you really not to. And the reason why I say that is because the GFX that you got was at such a good price.
I mean, I got it for
a song.
I don't even. It was brand new.
Whatever number you're thinking in your head, less. Just gonna put it to you that way.
Yeah, it was
an
absurd.
absolute steal.
Yeah.
And I was like, Gene, like it truly makes no sense to wait. Like if you 100% are going to get this camera in the future, go ahead and get it now, because you already want to be making the work that you want to be doing with that camera now.
Yeah.
So why not get the camera now? And then Steven came in, and Steven was a little bit more logical than I am. I'm just someone that's like, just do it. Cause like, I'm one of those people that like, once I make the decision in my head, like, oh, I want this camera, I don't stop thinking about it until I just get it. Like, it just like the mental energy and capacity that it takes up in my life, it makes no sense for me not to just do it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I'm gonna drive myself crazy. So I was like, Gene, just do it. And Steven was like, just wait. You just got the A7R5. And I was telling Gene, no, get rid of the A7R5, ship it back, get the A7R4.
Yeah.
It'll basically do the same thing as your 5. You save a little bit of cash, and you can put that cash towards the GFX 100S.
Like half the price cash also.
Yeah, half the price cash.
It was substantial.
Yes.
Yeah, I bought the A7, for context, I bought it brand new. My A7R4, so the generation before it. Also, it's a 2019 camera, so it's a bit older now. I don't care, but it's I got for $1,600 or $1,700.
Yes.
So literally
half the price.
less than half the price of what the A7R5 was for a camera that also I only bought for weddings.
Yes.
Like so, and I'm not doing very many anymore.
Yeah, and then so Gene doesn't do it, and then sure enough, what was it? 2 weeks later?
Oh, not even.
Not even.
Not
It
even
was
2
not
weeks
even.
later. It was
Later.
like a couple days
No,
later.
I think I started messaging that person just to like get more details.
Because you returned the A7R5.
I did.
First.
Yeah.
And then
started. I didn't have all this. I wasn't like spending tens of thousands of dollars just like floating in like the abyss either. Yeah.
And then you ended up just going and picking it up.
Yeah, I met this guy at McDonald's. I also told him like, dude, this is like with any Facebook Marketplace. I'm like, I'm not gonna go to your home. Like, it's gonna be a very public place.
Yes.
Meet me in the ball pit at a McDonald's.
I'll see you there. Make sure to take your shoes off because but I remember meeting him there, and for like, I felt bad for like half an hour. For half an hour straight, 30 minutes, I was like going through everything.
That's
like,
such a Gene thing.
Shout out that guy for letting you
He was
do
really
that.
nice.
Also, that's like very kind of him.
Yeah,
to
he
let
was
you
really
test run
nice.
it.
Like he, and he brought with him the 50 millimeter, which is the lens I bought with the camera. But for 30 minutes, and I needed that time to, also the cool thing about this camera was when I saw it out of the box, is a very different feeling than the A7R5. The A7R5, I was like, oh, it's a computer. I don't care. The GFX, I was like, whoa, this thing is like, it's like so different than anything I've accustomed to using.
Yeah.
And I remember I was taking photos of like people eating food and like out the window next to the highway, like nothing pretty. But I was so mind blown by like just the experience of shooting on that specific camera. And so, after 30 minutes, I was convinced nothing's wrong with it. It is, in fact, brand new. And then I just bought it on the spot. And then I show up to the studio. And yeah, Braxton
And I was
actually.
right.
Yeah, you were right.
Braxton was
Yeah.
right.
But then that shortly after ensued a whole other conversation about what to pair with it.
Yes.
Which was also very interesting.
Yeah, and this was to backtrack a little bit. Steven and I had a conversation with one of our friends. Actually, we all know Austin out in LA.
Austin John.
Yeah,
My guy.
incredible person, incredible photographer, but he has spoken very highly of the Ricoh cameras in general. He has the Ricoh GR3. And I remember when I was going back and forth with him when we were having the conversations about medium format, I was asking him too, like, what do you like? And he told me, like, if you're going medium format, just get the GFX. He's like, if you have the money, get the Hassie, but like otherwise get the GFX. They're great. But you're gonna he's like, get the Ricoh too then. And I was like, no, maybe. And I think like when I got the GFX, I also knew pretty quickly that it wouldn't be a camera I'd carry around everywhere though. And for now it's worked because the lens on it, the 50 is smaller, but the lens I want to buy pretty soon for it is bigger. And it's not gonna be a camera I'm gonna carry around everywhere. And he's like, honestly, you should get a smaller camera with it if you shoot medium format. And the Ricoh's a great system.
Yep.
And that led me to eventually buying the Ricoh after we had some more conversations. And I got on Facebook Marketplace as well
And
for a really good deal.
And Braxton texted that listing to you.
Yeah. Did you?
Did I?
No, I don't think you
know.
actually did, but you're on the same wavelength. when it
We're
comes to
definitely
Facebook
on the same
Marketplace.
wavelength. I probably saw the same listing that you bought it from.
Probably. Because it was a guy out of Ohio for a good price.
Yeah.
And he shipped it to me without me paying first for it.
That's
Wow.
And that's why I knew, like, because I'm always cautious with like buying anything that's like,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
gonna ship it to you. I'm like, no. But he's like, yeah, I'll send it to you. And then he didn't even charge me for the shipping. I just paid him for the shipping because it was so nice of him. But I got the camera, everything worked, and I just Venmo'd him. And it was
You've gotten
done.
very lucky with your Facebook Marketplace sellers.
Actually, that just happened to me with the S-Vibe 2 I just bought.
Yeah.
He shipped it to me without
Oh,
paying
you didn't
him.
pay for it first?
I sent him $100 as like a good faith
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
And then I was like, I'll pay you the rest when you send me the tracking number.
Wow.
And yeah,
Yeah.
so easy.
Dang.
So nice.
Also, though, some of the encouragement of getting the Ricoh was because you had the Q.
Yes.
Liz has the X100V. And for a long time, especially when I was in the full swing of film, I was like, these cameras are stupid. Like,
Yeah.
why would you buy a camera like that? And now I'm just like, no, I get it now. And I still love film, but I get the attraction for cameras that are basically like small 35 millimeter cameras, because I like 35, but that you can sling around all day with you. And now I see the appeal. Why I get why the X100V was so popular, because it's so, and then the recipes, and then like you're talking about, tethering it to your phone and having those images instantaneously.
Yes.
As opposed to, even with Nice, having to ship out,
Yep.
wait, get the scans back, and still like touch the scans after that too. Yeah.
Yeah, and like by the time that like a great example, and when I really made, or like when it really hit me that like, oh, there's something here, was actually the Sacramento trip when we were still shooting the doc.
Yeah.
I was the first person of that trip to be able to share images.
You had the XE3 then?
Because at the time I had the Fuji XE3.
Yeah.
And I just like ran around our Airbnb or whatever, like even throughout the trip. And I was able to take photos the whole time and then just uploaded it to a PicTime gallery and like sent it to everyone. And I was the first one to share images. Everyone had like sent film off to the lab. And like by the time people got their images back, you know, the kind of like the recency nostalgia of that trip had kind of died down, you know, and it just like the images aren't as, not as meaningful, but like less of importance of the moment, if that makes sense. So having a camera that you can just like quickly like put stuff onto your phone and then like immediately send them off to a friend, a loved one, whatever, is at this point, I don't know why I didn't do it sooner. Like it's like such a big deal to me now, being able to just like share images instantly, or like getting like a digital preview of your film work is also really a big deal. And these cameras are just like perfect for that.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, that is kind of the overarching theme of this whole thing that the three of us in particular have been going through the last few months is change.
Yeah.
More than
Change.
anything is change. You know, for context too, I don't want anyone to, you know, just listen to this out of context that, oh, they're waxing poetic about film, or, oh my gosh, they're coming back to digital. That's so cool of them.
Yeah.
The truth is, between the three of us, we've all been shooting professionally anywhere from 8 to 12 years.
Yeah.
Like this has been our job for so long.
Yep.
For very long at this point.
A very long time. Yeah. And we've really gone through the ringer in terms of camera systems and professional working environments and just absurd work schedules throughout the years. And we've had phases that we go through when it comes to making images. Sometimes we don't want to pick up a camera at all because every time we touch a camera, it's work immediately, instantly. I think that's why we even started to shoot film as actively as we did, is because we were kind of getting burnt out from just straight up weddings and volume shooting and all of these big projects. Because every time we picked up our big full frame mirrorless camera, proper fast lenses, all that stuff, it just felt like work as soon as you touched a camera. And we were trying to bring the joy back in a different way by adding film into our lives.
Also think I think it's also worth mentioning that I feel like now that we've been doing this for so many years, I think, again, just being like completely transparent, I think we don't need the validation anymore.
Sure.
I feel like, especially like younger in my career, like I used to try to show up to a job with the absolute biggest camera rig I could possibly build.
For sure.
Just like with all of the most unnecessary things possible, because I felt like that kind of gave me validation, you know. And the same thing can be said about like film or like whatever camera that you buy. Like, for the longest time, there was a lot of validation around shooting film specifically. There was a lot of validation around getting a really cool camera, brand names, like all that stuff. But like now that we're much older and we've been doing this for so long, and we just don't really care to have that validation anymore either. It allows you to be more honest with yourself and be like, oh, I can just get what actually works. Like I can... I can show up to, like, now I show up to weddings and I could care less, like, what camera, like, there's been times in my past where, like, a guest had a nicer camera than what I was shooting with. And at the time, it, like, ate me up. And, like, now, like, I so could care less. Like, I've had clients comment, like, on my queue, and, like, I'm shooting, like, most of the morning with it just because it's fun. And they're like, you're shooting all this, like, on that tiny camera? And I'm like, yep. And, like, now, like, I just don't really care anymore, So, like, it's a great phase to be in life where like you don't really feel like you need to have a certain camera or a certain brand or something like that to give validation or whatever. You can just be honest with yourself.
Absolutely. And sometimes you can only have that mindset shift by putting in the hours.
Yes.
And putting in the years. We go through mindset changes, we go through circumstance changes, we go through philosophical changes, and it's okay. Like we are humans, we will change and evolve over time, and not everything is going to be that constant as far as the tools are concerned. But I think deep down, the three of us, all we really want to do is continue making beautiful images, and regardless of what tool we're holding in the moment, we just want to enjoy that process, because reiterate this more than anything else, this was a hobby for all of us. At some point in our lives, this was a hobby first and foremost. It was something we did without needing validation, without needing attention, without needing likes, without needing money. It was just something that we wanted to do. And I think there is a certain element of constantly pursuing that kind of wholesome desire again, amidst still using it as our main source of income.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, the whole concept of this episode being like vintage digital cameras too. Like the reality is as time passes, everything is just getting better, technically speaking. But like for sure, that doesn't mean that you're getting better as an artist or a creative or photographer simultaneously. And so like when you brought that up earlier in the episode too, gear does matter. It does matter and it doesn't matter, but it's so subjective. Really, like if you are a self-sustaining, like a freelancer or someone who runs your own business, like gear, how you use it, what you choose to use is very subjective. And I think for the longest time, especially being a Canon shooter, I would be, my honest, like frankness about all of it is like, I thought maybe if I shot Canon for a long time with YouTube that there'd be partnerships or sponsorships. And that just wasn't the case. And I realized like, man, these tools at this point, I got so good at using them that it's like so mindless to me when I'm actually shooting. And I think like, I don't care if a year from now I switch with a different camera or the GFX turns into different. Like I don't care anymore. I think I just need to want to enjoy shooting with those cameras. Otherwise, it'll be the same place I found myself in not too long ago. Thousands of gears, like thousands of dollars worth of gear, just sitting in my roller derby, never being touched, even though I invested so much money into using them because it was so to me.
And I think that brings up a really good point. And I saw this the other day, like on a Reddit thread or something. And I told you this. Someone said, because it was like a Reddit thread, and he was like, I have all these cameras and I always feel guilty getting another one, but it brings me so much fulfillment. And I don't know who this was, but they are wise beyond their years. They need their own podcast. They said, maturing is realizing that cameras and photography are two different hobbies, and it's okay to have hobbies in both. Like, it's okay to want cameras. It's okay to find joy in cameras. And I think that's honestly like really important for people like us who are very long tenured photographers, that, you know, it's very hard to like keep joy in something that's also tied to your income, you know? And so for us, like being able to kind of transfer that joy into cameras per se, and less photography and more cameras, and knowing that that's also like, okay, I feel like there's a lot of like guilt tripping in the industry of like guilt tripping of people who are camera obsessed, or like people who like really like cameras and enjoy cameras. They're like, oh, gear doesn't matter, like blah, 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 whatever. Like, no, it's okay. Like, it's fun to try out these cameras and to switch mediums from film to digital, try out like all these, like the GR, the Q, like whatever. Like, it's fun. And it's, you know, if that's what keeps your joy in it, then great.
Yeah, I would say like out of we are the three in the studio that probably enjoy cameras the most.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we're always buying cameras, but we keep up with all the news. Like, I would say everyone else in our studio, they're talented filmmakers and photographers, but they don't necessarily care about cameras like we do. And like, these cameras are sitting on the table here. These are old cameras. Like, this is 9 years old. The camera that you're going to talk about that you bought and returned
12 years old.
Was a very old camera. And so like, I just don't care anymore. That's kind of like where I'm at in my career too, is as long as I'm having fun and enjoying my work and the tools that I'm using, I don't care if people think I'm being wishy-washy with gear, or I'm not brand loyal anymore. I will say that too. I'm not brand loyal anymore.
Oh, we
either.
know, Gene.
Yes, I know.
And yeah, it kind of goes back to
Whoops. So don't sponsor me ever, because I don't know. I don't know. I can't guarantee anything at this point.
Rip. But yeah, it kind of goes back to that validation thing, you know. Like, I feel like a few years ago, like you show up to the photo walk or whatever, and you showed up with like a digital camera, you'd have been like, oh, this feels bad, you know, like being like the one person who didn't have like a cool film camera or whatever. It's just like, now, like, could care less.
Or you show up to a workshop and you don't have a dual harness with 2 cameras and 2 prime lenses.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
Just like whatever,
It's
works for you. And at that time, great.
Yeah. That's a really good way to almost put a period on this section of the episode. Is just like, do whatever works for you.
Yeah.
There are infinite possibilities available to us these days. Just do what you enjoy doing. Truly, at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Whatever gets you inspired to go out and shoot, do that. Do that thing.
Yeah.
With that being said,
yes,
let's nerd out on some of these little
the
guys.
Actual specs
Let's actually deep dive. So that was where we're coming from. That's where our hearts are at. That's what we wanted to share with you primarily. But we also want to talk about the specifics of these cameras that have been changing our minds. Should I start by finally talking about the one that I returned?
You should.
We've teased it enough.
We've teased it enough. Okay, so the camera that I bought is a fascinating little camera that I've considered for many years. It's the Sony RX1. It was originally leased in 2012.
Yes.
12-year-old camera. The very first full frame point and shoot ever released.
Crazy.
Fixed lens.
So it's 3 years or 4 years before? You said 2016?
Yeah, 2016.
So 4 years before the Q was created by Leica. It was the very first full frame point and shoot camera. And we're talking like, it's the size of the Ricoh right here. The body is. It might even be a little shorter, but it had basically
this
lens attached to it. So
think
it was like
so this body,
yes,
but this lens.
Yes. It looked wild. It was, I think, ahead of its time in some ways.
Yes.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Was.
It was like a Zeiss f2, beautiful lens, 35 millimeter f2 Zeiss lens. Full frame sensor inside of a body that small is absolutely absurd.
That's crazy to me. That's full frame.
The image quality out of it was fantastic. No complaints there.
Yeah.
Funny enough, what Braxton just showed you is exactly why it didn't click with me, is that it felt so disproportionate to itself.
Yeah.
The lens felt way too big for the size of the body. And yes, you can add grips and little thumb levers in the hot shoe and things like that. But at the end of the day, I found myself just in 1 week's time picking it up and like slipping off of it so often. I was like, this is ridiculous. I feel like, and that I think right there is actually a really important component to this whole conversation too, is the way that you can interact with that tool heavily influences your feelings towards it and whether or not you actually want to go out and shoot with it.
Yeah.
The ergonomics of cameras, I think, are drastically underemphasized.
Yeah.
That's why
it's a really important
That's
thing.
why I hated Sony bodies for a really long
Yes,
time. And I was a former Sony shooter.
Yeah.
I hated those bodies.
Yeah.
I have fairly large hands.
Yeah.
And like my pinky would always like fall off, and like the body was just so small.
Yep.
And ergonomics are a huge part that not a lot of people talk about.
Yeah. So that's really what it came down to for the RX1. Images were great. Autofocus was totally passable.
Yeah.
It was very customizable. I wanted to love it so badly, but I was telling both of you guys this. I was like, I don't want to force myself into liking it because I think at the end of the day,
because it's still not cheap either.
It's like I got mine for $900 from MPB, which is not an inexpensive camera.
Yeah.
Even for the specs that it has, it's not inexpensive, and with shipping and tax and all that, it's $1,000 all in. I'm like,
for like a camera from 2012 that like you might not like.
Right. I just didn't totally sit right with me. So I shipped it off this past Saturday, gave it a fair shot, but also wanted to be honest with myself about how I was going to feel about it long term. Just didn't feel like the right fit. I am still on the search for something along the lines of the Ricoh and the Q. Frankly, I would love to justify a Q in my life because shooting with yours has been delightful. That is such a great feeling camera.
Yes.
But not necessarily for me right now, but we'll see what the future holds if I can find something that kind of scratches that itch. I do have something in mind right now that we've been talking about a little bit, but it's modern.
Oh, okay. I know what this is.
I'll just mention it briefly. I'm looking loosely at wow, that's a pretty loud one that time.
Yeah, wow.
That's pretty.
Yeah, it's kind of rude there, Chicago.
Chad, could you tell them the...
That's so rude, Chicago.
thank you.
Just open the window, just do a little.
And shout a little bit,
I am, in general, I'm thinking of just downsizing my kit quite a bit and trying to find a balance between still having video capabilities, still having modern functionality, but something that feels similar to the Q. And what I'm entertaining as of now, I might mention it in a future episode if I actually do it or not, is the Sony A7C line of cameras because they are digital rangefinders and they have all of the almost like makes your job too easy kind of features in them, which you can use to your benefit or detriment or whatever. But I'm interested in them specifically because ergonomically it feels more intentional to shoot with a rangefinder. And I love the Q for that reason. I love my M6 for that reason. But I think that might be the camera that could toe the line between professional photo, personal photo, and video all in one, maybe.
Yeah.
That remains to be seen.
Yeah.
I did just buy and return a Sony camera, so we'll see if that's strike two on Sony if I go this route. But that's something I'm entertaining right now. I'll talk about this one after I give you guys a chance to speak. But tell me about your Ricoh, because you've been loving that thing so much.
He blabbers about it all day, every day.
Literally all the time.
Yeah, it's should be a toy, but the images it creates are pretty awesome. I've known about this camera for a long time, or these line of cameras, because of street photographers who I know speak very highly of it. Honestly, I just trusted Austin when he said, like, get a Ricoh.
Yeah.
But as I did more research, not only are there different generations, but there are different focal lengths too. And then there are different features. For me, at least, I knew I wanted a 28 over the 40 millimeter focal length. And then for me, a non-negotiable was flash. I wanted something that had flash because, I don't know, like, it's fun to have flash on cameras, and you don't always have a flash on you. So like this camera specifically, I like it because it's small. This is how I always carry it on me. It's just strapped on my wrist. What's nice about the form of this is it's really tiny, so I keep it in my pocket on shoots. Most times I'm pretty cautious of clients seeing this camera. Unlike the Q, which is like, you can bring that out and even people still say, oh, on that small camera, but like if they saw this, they'd be like, give us our money back because you're not taking real photos right now.
I'll hire my dad to come and shoot instead.
But I like this camera because it has a flash, a little pop-up one. So even that, I get to dictate when it comes out, and when it's back in, it's really small. But it's 28 millimeters. It's fast. It's great quality. I've begun pairing it with a lot of my
Sorry, I just have like a visual of like Gene showing up to a wedding, like harnessed up with like the 28 Rico and like the 50 Rico. And that's what you shoot all day.
No GFX.
No GFX. Just the Ricos.
Imagine.
Like legitimately, this camera, it takes great images as like supplementary images. I would not do an entire shoot on this. I mean, like maybe you can get away with it, but like when you sneak in a few for context shots, like I think it's great. But I've had it for...
You've snuck those in for context shots alongside
everywhere.
the GFX.
Everywhere. Oh yeah, everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And I guarantee you, like client can't tell.
Client
No,
definitely
they
can't tell.
definitely
No, and
can't.
also like the raw. What's fun about this camera, kind of like the Fuji's, is it has recipes in them. There's one specifically that every Ricoh shooter uses. I still have these saving RAW and JPEG simultaneously.
Okay.
So that when I want to send it to my phone, I've got that JPEG recipeed image already. But most times I'm still editing the raw images to pair with my actual work and my portfolio work. But it's been fun to have with me all the time.
Yeah.
It's as simple as like, unlike film too, like when I had friends hanging out who like even a point and shoot, they're like, oh, how do you soft focus it? And then like they just didn't know how to use it. This still like you can't
mess it up.
Everyone had a camera like this at some point when they're growing up. So like I also like that anyone can take this camera. I can set it to like aperture priority.
Yeah.
And they can just like rock and roll with it. Yeah, I've liked this camera a lot. It's a camera that it gives me so much joy. And I like that's 28.
Yeah.
Walk us through the specs. APS-C sensor.
APS-C, I think it's 16 megapixels,
Okay.
which again, honestly, like is plenty.
And pop-up flash, but the
Yeah.
GR3 has pop-up
Yes.
viewfinder.
So this is the GR2. This is the 2015 model. Ricoh released the GR3 in 2019. That one though does not have the pop-up flash. It has a pop-up EVF,
Okay.
which is cool.
Yeah.
So I will say the only thing I don't like about this camera is I find myself doing this all the time. I'm like always out of like habit from the M6. I'm always doing this. And I find myself like constantly doing this. I'm like, you dummy. Like there's no viewfinder there. But the Ricoh's still making new cameras. They just made like another edition of the
It was like the
Ricoh.
GR3i or
Yeah, something like that. So they're definitely like the naming scheme is bad.
The GR3 HDF.
It's
Oh, is that what it was?
And it was they took out the internal ND that was on the GR3.
there is an internal ND on this, yeah.
Oh, and that one
And
too.
this one too, yeah.
They took the internal ND out, and in this specific one, they added a diffusion filter. It's like a Pro Mist inside
Oh,
the
that's kind
camera.
of cool.
For the extra vibes.
For the
Wow.
extra vibes. Yeah.
That's
it's
kinda
the
cool.
exact same specs as the GR3 from 5 years ago.
Yeah,
or
there's
whatever.
like a Ricoh.
It's-
There's like a 3X too. There's different
There
models.
is. The
of it,
X
yeah.
is the one with the 40 mil lens.
Yes, yeah.
But I thought it was funny that they didn't update anything. They're just like, we put a diffusion filter in.
I hope that if they make cameras like more generations, they don't mess with this too much. Like what
Yeah.
they've made is great. I have seen a lot of people put like a 28
Like,
view.
like optical viewfinder.
Yeah.
I've seen people put lens hoods on here. I'm like, I don't want any of that. I want this thing to stay small. It's the whole point of it.
Yeah.
But I have seen people kind of like spec this. Like I think Faisal recently showed on his Instagram story.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, GR. But I'm like, that's not why I bought this
Yeah,
camera.
King Japes also has one that's pretty geared out too.
Yeah, he
Yes.
does.
Yep.
I'm like, I don't want my clients to see this camera. So I want it to be like as
So
inconspicuous
sneaky.
as
You need
possible.
to be able to stash that in a pocket
Yeah.
as quickly as possible.
It's true. But that's the only thing I don't like about this camera. Like, so I do still like the idea of having like a Q or like an X100 camera that wouldn't be like doubted if I
Sure.
were having it on a shoot. But that's the Ricoh.
It's
And
so
I like
cute.
it a lot. Yeah, it's been a lot
An
of fun.
APS-C sensor in that size of a body is pretty
Yeah.
Yeah.
impressive.
Because most of like you have like the G7X is like the Canon.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
like those all have 1-inch sensors.
1 inch, yeah, as well as the RX100 series from
Yeah.
Sony. About that size, but substantially less. I think they kind of compensate with zoom lenses versus a fixed
Yeah.
lens. And there's some trade-offs and all that, but I
Feel
mean,
very impressive camera.
it's a very impressive camera for the size and for the quality that you get. I mean, there are so many times where I'm just looking over at your desk while you're editing, and I can't tell what.
No, if I
is-
showed you guys like the galleries I'm delivering,
No.
I only remember because I shot them, but like
Yeah.
if I didn't shoot them, I probably couldn't tell either.
Especially when you're looking at images like on your phone or whatever.
You can't, especially
definitely
social
can't
media,
tell.
you can't tell.
No, not at
Absolutely
all.
not.
You can't
No.
tell. Yeah.
No, it's a fun little guy.
Yeah.
What's the Q doing for you over here?
My turn. I could rant about this camera all day. It's been life-changing. So for context, this is the original Leica Q. This is the Q1 released in 2016. It's full frame, 28 mil lens, 1.7. Technically, it's a Summilux, but the actual Summilux is a 1.4. This is a 1.7. So do with that as you will. this has been my favorite camera that I've gotten in a while. Like I haven't had this much fun with a camera in a really long time, especially a digital camera.
Yeah.
This might be the most fun I've ever had with a digital camera per se. Again, as I've said before, I wanted a 35 millimeter replacement. So I still wanted something that still had like a real camera feel. I feel like in this kind of like vintage digital, whatever you want to call it, thing that we're talking about, I feel like there's two different categories. You have your more 35 millimeter like real camera replacements, things that would replace like a Leica M6, a Nikon F3, you know, cameras that you could use anywhere between like semi-seriously to professional work.
Yep.
And then you have like your more like digicam point and shoots,
For
like
sure.
like a GR2, a GR3, you know, a G7X, whatever.
For sure.
And so I definitely wanted something on the former side. I wanted like a real camera replacement, something that felt like a real camera, something that like I could go out and shoot and feel like I'm using a real camera, because I'm a very process-based person. If it doesn't feel right, I don't like it at all. That's why I've always been a huge opponent of iPhone photography.
I knew you were gonna say it. I knew it. I felt it coming, and I was like, "He's gonna say it." And he said it.
You will never meet a bigger hater for iPhone photography than myself.
For the record, Gene and I are huge iPhone photography
Can't stand it.
fans.
I
You're-
don't take photos on my phone
It's
ever.
2v1 is the current count.
I love it, and you hate.
I love
I've
it
known
so
this about
much.
you since I met you. Yeah.
No, hate it. I am a photographer. I take photos with a camera. That's
so do
what I do.
The camera on my phone.
I thought we were doing a pretty good job not being pretentious for most of the episode. I think we just crossed the line.
I am so anti-pretentious on everything except iPhone photography. And you can't even make the argument. You can't even make the argument. I feel like anymore, you can't make the argument that, you know, if that's the only camera you own, great. If you can afford an iPhone, you can afford a $200 D3100 on eBay. Just going to put that out there. In my
That is fair.
opinion.
Phones are so expensive.
Phones are
now.
so expensive now.
But you can access Instagram on them
Yeah, and make yourself feel bad about yourself
and set an alarm to wake yourself up in the morning.
so that you can continue scrolling Instagram once you're done sleeping.
Well, if I wanted to do that, I'd buy an alarm clock. You know, that's because that's also what they were made for.
You have an alarm clock that is Instagram?
Do you actually have one?
Okay, back to the queue.
Yes, the cue.
So I tried many digital cameras in this style for probably like 2 years now. My first real foray into it was borrowing my friend's X100F. I really liked that camera. I still think it's a pretty underrated camera because like there was so much hype around the V. And I was like, get the F. Like the F is less expensive. Pretty much everything is there.
They're almost the same camera.
They're almost the same camera. They're missing a few different features,
Yeah.
but pretty close. Loved the F. And that's when I ended up getting the XE3. Really loved that camera.
Fuji.
Yeah, from Fuji.
Yep.
Super small, super lightweight. I did like that it had interchangeable lenses. I kept I think it's like the 18 f2 or whatever. It's like their 28 equivalent. I pretty much kept that on there, but I did like that you kind of did have flexibility there if you needed to. And I paired that with the little bitty Fuji flip up flash that Fuji makes for their cameras. It's like powered through the
remember
hot
this.
shoe. Best flash ever. And I really loved that setup. It was great. I'm a big black and white person. So being able to shoot black and white JPEG simulations and it actually looked pretty good. Liked it a lot. Ended up selling that camera because I was making some more professional gear changes, and it was one of those things I was like, I went through a season where I wasn't using it as much anymore, and then so when I switched gear systems or whatever, I just kind of got rid of it to kind of help fund other gear purchases or whatever. But ever since I sold it, I still kind of had that hole in my life of I'm missing what that camera fulfilled for me. And so I tried a few other things. I tried the V. I tried a few other things. I'm kind of blanking on their names. More recently, I tried the Nikon ZF. And I so wanted to love that camera so badly because I've been shooting the Nikon F3 for years. That was actually my first camera I ever got. And so, Nikon hand in hand, everything on paper looked great. I got that camera. I rented it. Didn't love it.
I was with you when you opened the box.
Gene saw the disappointment in my face. As soon as I opened it out of the box, I knew it wasn't the right camera. It was too big.
Yeah.
It didn't quite fit. Another interesting point that I think really matters, you kind of touched on this earlier, having a rangefinder digital camera, there's something about the rangefinder style that kind of helps you alienate that digital feeling. The ZF had a typical like top
Just
viewfinder,
SLR
whatever,
style.
the SLR style viewfinder, and it just still felt like a very digital camera. There's something about rangefinder style format that just really helps you kind of get out of that digital headspace in a way. And so after that, I had also a few months prior to trying the ZF had used the Q2 and fell in love with it. I used it for a job. I had rented it for a job just, for fun, and adored almost everything about that camera. Just like the way it felt, just like the actual use of it, the practicality of it, just absolutely adored that camera. The only thing I didn't love, funny enough, were the files out of it. I loved everything else about the camera. I didn't love the files, but part of that was I knew that sensor in particular. I own a Leica SL2, and I don't love the sensor in that SL2, and they have the same sensor in the Q2. It's that 47 megapixel sensor or whatever, and it's absolute garbage in low light. It also has a weird thing with ambient greens and skin tones that I've never been able to figure out. But I didn't quite love the files, especially like if I'm photographing a wedding. 1.7 is nice to have, but if you go anything past, even at 3200, those files are very grainy. That sensor just doesn't perform well in low light. So that's when I started playing around with, I was like, okay, I could get the Q3, and Q3 would be much better in low light because you have like the triple resolution sensor or whatever.
Right, yeah.
But like, let's be honest, none of us are made out of money, and spending that much money on a quote unquote point and shoot fixed lens camera is quite ridiculous.
Yeah.
Truthfully, it's just like, that's too much money for something that I don't use 100% professionally.
I love 28 millimeters. $6,000 for 28 millimeters is quite a lot.
Oh, crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yes, you can crop in and stuff, but like still.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite ridiculous.
Yeah.
So that's when I started throwing around the idea of the Q1. And I was very curious about it because no one talks about it at all. Like the Q1 is very much like the forgotten son of the Q series. Like everyone talks about Q2. Now everyone talks about Q3. No one talks about Q1. And so I was doing some research or whatever, and actually our friend Chris Chu made a very informative video about the Q1, and I was like, screw it, let's ball. And so I ordered it, never even testing it, never even playing with it. I just trusted Chris and his video.
Which is fair. Yeah. I mean, he's very trustworthy.
I trust Chris with my life.
Yeah. So. He knows Leica cameras.
Oh yeah, he knows Leica very well. So I ordered it, and the great thing about it is that Q1, Q2 essentially have the exact same body. It's the same lens. There's only like two slight differences that I know of between Q1 and Q2. Q2 has a slightly different button layout on the back.
Okay.
And then Q2 has a different on switch. So with the Q2, for those watching, Q2 just has a simple on and off switch here. Whereas the Q1, that's also where you set your drive mode. Here.
Interesting.
And that's like the main gripe about the Q1 is that it, like in a quick scenario, you bump it to continuous very easily.
Gotcha.
But other than that, they're essentially the same camera. And
the files are the same too?
Different sensors.
Different sensor, which was a huge plus for me.
Yes. You actually wanted lower resolution for better low light.
I wanted lower resolution for better low light. Also, like this is a whole other conversation, but I think high resolution cameras are not a complete fad, but they are very overrated in my opinion.
Yeah.
They don't make a lot of sense for most people.
For the majority
of people, it just makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
So it's 24 megapixels, if I remember correctly. So it'd be much better in low light, and it's much better for that kind of phone workflow that we were talking about, where it's very hard to airdrop or, to transfer via app a 80 megabyte photo file, but being able to transfer a 24 megapixel sized file was so much better. Yeah. And then to top it all off, Leica has by far the best app out there of all the camera manufacturers. I believe
it's
Leica,
not even close.
It's not even close.
No.
I believe Leica actually worked with Apple directly to develop the app, if I'm remembering correctly. And it's just a fantastic experience. It's so easy to connect, even with the Q1, with it being a 2016 model. I believe technically it either doesn't have Wi-Fi or it doesn't have Bluetooth. I can't remember. It's missing one of those, and instead it has it's
an
called
Ethernet port.
It has it's called, what is it called? I'm checking it out now.
A little LAN set up with your Xbox.
Yeah, what's it called? WLAN. It's what it's called. I'm assuming it works very similar to like a LAN.
Okay. Yeah.
Whatever. Like it literally says WLAN.
I wasn't that far off.
Yes.
That's hilarious.
It's called WLAN, and all you do is you pull up the app and you scan this little barcode.
Oh my gosh,
and it connects.
no way.
And it connects just as seamlessly as any Bluetooth camera or whatever.
That's awesome.
And then, so yeah, ever since I got it, it's so crazy.
That's incredible.
It's just been absolutely everything I wanted to. This, I think there's something I remember reading people talk about this, and I was like, like these people are being a little pretentious or whatever. But there's definitely something which we should talk about with this camera.
Yeah.
There's definitely something to these older digital sensors.
Yep.
Even like I feel like anything past 2016, 2017, we kind of very similar to like iPhone sensors. You know, I hear like Forrest Mankins, photographer that we love and respect. He talks all the time about like his old like iPhone 6 or like iPhone 6S or whatever. And he was like, I missed the photos out of that camera because like Apple kind of got lost in the sauce with like the over digital sharpening and all of that. And I feel like something similar could be said about newer digital sensors where like we're just getting to the point where everything's just like a little too digital. Wouldn't even say, I mean, perfect is pretty subjective, but like, it's just like, it's too clean. It's too digital. It's too sharp. There's just too much information there.
Yeah.
And this just has like these files out of this camera just have such a lovely balance of detail, but also like not feeling like I went out and shot photos with an R5 or something like that. You know, like they have some texture.
Yeah.
They don't have that over sharpening. Like shadows don't get extremely muddy with all the trying to pull out all the digital information and all that stuff. And it's just, honestly, it's my perfect camera. There's some slight knocks to it. The EVF could be updated. Obviously, it's a 2016 EVF, so like it's not as nice as something.
The EVF is, yeah.
I mean, I still use it.
Yeah.
It's the only time
I would too.
I mean, like the only time I don't really use it is when it's like super bright outside, because then I can't really see my focus peaking. I use this camera almost always in manual focus. I hardly ever use the autofocus. That's one thing I really loved about the Q is, for those watching again, you have this little tab underneath and it's locked into autofocus right now. But if you push the button and flip it over, it's now in manual focus, and it operates very similarly to like a Leica M6 in that way. You have the focus tab, and then you pair that with focus peaking in the EVF, and it just makes for a very lovely experience. So in bright daylight situations, it's hard to see the focus peaking a little bit because the EVF, again, like it's not that high resolution, but it's totally usable, especially in indoor or in shade or something like that. And yeah, I shoot it very similar to Gene. I actually, again, I'm a big black and white shooter. So I'm shooting in the monochrome picture profile setting inside the camera, which actually performs very well. Leica has a very good monochrome setting in their cameras. And I'm shooting JPEG plus RAW. So if I want a quick photo to my phone, I'll just, connect and send the black and whites over to my phone. And then if I do want to actually edit it, I just pull up Lightroom Mobile, I edit the RAW file. And again, it's been absolutely fantastic. I have very little to no negative things. Honestly, the only thing that really bothers me about the camera is the battery life isn't the best. And unfortunately, because it was a little early to the game, there's no way to like plug it in via USB-C or anything like that. It does have a micro USB port, but you can't charge it in any way through that. Okay. So your only way to charge it is by bringing an actual physical battery charger and charging that. And it takes the little bitty, like kind of square batteries. I don't even know what you call these, but lots of earlier cameras took these sorts of batteries. And battery life just isn't the best, but I just carry a butt ton with me and carry them everywhere. But yeah, nothing but great things to say about it. The 28, having 28, love 28. I used to be a big 35 person. Over the years, I've come to really love 28. One of the gripes about this camera is that technically the 28 is a little bit wider than traditional 28. I got an answer from a technician, something to do with them putting a fixed lens Summilux, like getting that aperture value in a fixed lens. There's some physics there that they couldn't quite make it an actual 28, something, I think, flange distance and some other stuff. So I was told by a technician that it's a 25 millimeter that software corrects in camera to 26.5. So it's actually technically the images that you'll get out of camera is a 26.5 millimeter field of view. But again, it's labeled as a 28 because I think all camera manufacturers give a little bit of leeway to what their actual physical mathematical field of views are. But that doesn't bother me a bit. It still has the crop modes like all the other Qs. So I push this button right here and it can crop to 35 and 50. I never cropped to 50, but I've actually come to enjoy the 35 mil crop.
Yeah.
There's still enough detail and resolution there that you don't notice a huge difference. You definitely still have like, if for trained photographer eyes like us, we can still tell that it's a 28 field of view within 35 mil frame lines, but it's for most applications, it's totally fine. And again, like I said, I could blabber about this camera all day. It's truly been a joy. It replaced everything I hated about 35 millimeter and made me love some things about digital that I never thought I would love about digital. And yeah, it's just perfect. I apologize to everyone who was looking to buy one because prices might rise after this. That's another big, huge thing about this camera is that, yes, it's still relatively expensive. It's going for around $2,500, I would say, is like usual pricing. I got mine for a really good deal. But it's still substantially cheaper than the Q2 and definitely cheaper than the Q3. Q2 still hold a value of what, like 3,500 to 4,000, I would say.
Yeah.
So being able to pick up that style body, and of course you're paying for the Leica name and all that stuff, but being able to do it for around 2,500 to 2,000, amazing.
Yeah.
Love it.
Especially if you love 28 millimeters.
Yes.
It's a camera you'll always use and can easily pair with another camera that has a complementary focal length, like 50.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's
It's a
fantastic.
special camera.
Yeah, it's a very special camera and definitely recommend people to at least give it a try.
Yeah. That's the dream right there.
Yeah.
I will just quickly kind of reference this last camera. It's not one that I've admittedly really put through its paces yet. I've shot maybe a couple thousand photos with it, but the Canon 5D Classic I think falls within this kind of genre as well. It's definitely the oldest camera. This was released in 2005. Whoa. It was the very first digital EF mount camera that Canon made.
Whoa.
So this was after like 1V or whatever.
Yep. Yeah. So those lenses that they had that were compatible with their 1V, 1N, all of those were compatible with this. And this was the very first EF mount digital camera that Canon ever made. I bought it 2 years ago for $170 for the body.
That's crazy.
Which is nuts to me. That's still the price that they're going for generally right now. This is, by a lot of people's estimations, a very special camera.
Yes.
A lot of photographers, like our friend Forrest, who we just mentioned, rave about this camera. There is definitely something very cool and special about the sensor in here. I think it's a 13 megapixel sensor. So, basically 4K, a 4K sensor, more or less. And it's lovely. I don't want to wax too poetic about it right now because I'd probably make this episode even longer than it already is, but it really is special. It's got something good going on.
It's those old like CCD sensors in particular.
What's funny, it's a CMOS sensor.
Or is it CMOS?
Actually, it is, yeah. But whatever Canon did in the early stage, first creating this sensor coming off the heels of film.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. It is special though. It's really lovely.
I've always been told that coming from film to digital, camera manufacturers were still trying to replicate color profiles of film.
Yes.
Don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I've always been told. And then just like over the years, it kind of gets changed and whatever. Now they're just doing their own thing. But definitely those older sensors are special.
Yeah. That's what I think. I actually just watched a video about the Leica M8, and Leica collaborated with Kodak to make the sensor replicate Kodachrome as close as possible.
Oh, that's cool.
And that was what they built the sensor around, was how can we get Kodachrome colors with this digital sensor. So there's a lot of intention from a lot of camera companies, I think, especially early on, to get, quote unquote, the film look, quite literally, pairing with a film company to create those colors. And then the black and white profile was supposed to model Triax as well.
Yeah.
So it's two specific Kodak.
Yeah, that's what I was
film
saying. Like Leica's monochrome profile has always been so good.
Really beautiful. So there's definitely some room there to explore and to get a film look without needing to continually invest in film itself. It's good to know when you want to use it, but it doesn't have to be something that you go into debt using,
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, the 5D Classic, super special camera. It does, I will admit, it does not give the same feeling as the Q or the Ricoh, certainly. It still feels like a very, chunky DSLR.
Yeah.
But it does have something very nostalgic and romantic to it.
I was about to say, even at this point, I feel like DSLRs kind of have a little bit of a nostalgic feel.
Yeah, a little bit, for sure. I mean, especially, this guy, The resolution on this back screen is dog water.
It's awful.
I mean, it is
It's
so
awful.
When I first got it and started taking photos with it, I was like, okay, I've got to get these photos off the CF card also to look at them, because looking at them on the back screen, I'm like, this is not
You
it.
can't
I'm
tell
like,
anything.
there's no data at all to look. It looks like a little 8-bit video game.
Yeah.
But the files themselves are lovely. It's not a low light monster or anything, but if you pair a good lens with it in good light, it is special. It's a very good camera. I think the value is so there for so many people.
yeah.
Like if you're using it in a studio context, it totally holds up. You know,
for
you
sure.
just make it work. You get this in like the nifty 50. All in, you're under $300. You've got a full frame camera.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. The value there is incredible.
And take it a step further and like adapt something.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Didn't you adapt your FD glass to it?
Yeah, it looks awesome.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
there you go.
Yeah, it is really fun to experiment with all these things. I think that comes back to the heart of why we've been talking about it so much is we do love this as a hobby in and of itself. I think it's really fun to just find all these different options for us to experiment with, and I think express ourselves artistically as well. You know, like these are all creative tools, and trying different things and different flavors, I think really helps engage our brains in different ways. And I think that's what we've been after this entire time. So yeah, wow. Do you guys have any closing thoughts or any encouragement for anyone listening or watching still an hour and 20 minutes in?
I feel like I talked a lot. So
I would just say if, it's like we said earlier too, if you like cameras a lot and you are a photographer or filmmaker, it's okay to like cameras a lot.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's
totally
okay to
okay.
like, I mean, I tell people too, like people ask me like, oh, what are your hobbies? I mean, very clearly coffee. I love coffee stuff, but like photography is actually my hobby too, like film photography in general. And so like what an incredible privilege it is for us to choose a vocation that we actually like the tool, like we have an actual personal interest in those tools involved in that vocation. But I would say like whatever tools that you have, like you can make awesome stuff. And if there's something that you're curious about, like give it a try. I think that like for the longest time we were just like told on YouTube and everywhere on social media, like, oh, shoot this, shoot that. But if you're curious about a 9-year-old camera, a 12-year-old camera, just see if you like it. I don't know, like, and with today's world, like things are so easily returnable too. So just like you really have very little to lose. So just give things a try. You might find that whatever you're used to as far as workflow might not be the thing that actually gets you creative either. You might just be stuck, but you don't even know it either. So
yeah, just really quickly, like don't ever let someone like try to like shame you otherwise for liking cameras. Like I said earlier, I feel like there's a lot of guilt tripping in our industry, which is such complete crap in my opinion, because I don't know of any other artistic medium where people get crapped on for liking the tools. Like I feel like if anything, they're applauded for it. Like if we heard of like an oil painter that was using special brushes made from, I don't know, horsehair or something, like we'd be like, oh, that's so sick. And they would be applauded for it.
Yeah.
But in our industry, for some reason, we like to look at other people who like cameras and be like, oh, they're ridiculous, or that's not what matters, like whatever. Like, no, like it's completely okay to love the tools that you're using for your work and go for it.
Yeah. I want to piggyback off of that because I just thought of another very relevant analogy. I would consider myself a former musician at this point. It is very much a hobby. It used to be the only thing that I did for about 10 years of my life. There is nothing wrong at all with wanting to look cool on stage.
Yes.
And that's always struck me because there was never any kind of dogging one another for having a cool looking guitar or for wanting the guitar to look cool in order to purchase it and make music with it. Never, everyone understands. It's just like an unspoken thing. It's like,
that's a good point.
No, I want to enjoy the aesthetic quality of this thing while I'm performing. While I want it to speak to me, I want to enjoy it because it in and of itself is a piece of art. And then therefore I'm going to take that piece of art and then create something beautiful with it. Never once was anyone I've ever spoken to shamed for wanting to have a cool looking guitar. If anything, it was that exact thing of like, oh dude, that's a sick axe. Oh my gosh, I love that. That is so cool. It's beautiful. It's this, that, the other. And there's something so pure and innocent about that. I feel like it's just like, it doesn't matter. Dude, like if you want to look cool while you're taking photos, That's
it.
fine. Do
Yeah.
it. Do your
Whatever
thing.
works for you.
Whatever works for you.
Yeah.
Like no one's opinions on this stuff should matter to you. Even our own. If you disagreed with everything we just said,
That's fine.
That's totally
Great.
fine. Also,
was
but what were you thinking?
If you want to look cool with your Sony A7R5, go for it. I won't judge you. I won't judge you.
We definitely have hard opinions about some things, but at the end of the day, they're also
It's a
just
good
like
point, though,
gut
yeah.
feelings. You know?
Unless you're taking photos on your iPhone.
Yeah, well, there's
well.
Brax's hill that he's
Yeah.
going to die
That's
on.
the one hill I will die on.
Yeah.
But the musician,
Yeah.
that analogy is very, it's spot on.
It's just, it is the truth, right? I think it's inherent in all of us. Anyone who considers himself an artist or just likes to make things, I think it's okay to appreciate the objects that you're using to make those things.
Yeah. It's about the craft.
It is.
Stop being so pretentious.
Yeah.
Like, let people like what they like.
Yeah, including the A7R5. Speaking of liking things, if you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button on this video. Subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please like the show there. Follow along. Leave a rating or a review. That would really help push episodes like this and conversations like this out to a wider and wider audience. We love you all very much. Braxton, thank you for joining us on your
Thank you for having
inaugural
me.
episode of Rally Caps. And we will see you all in the next episode. Peace.
Bye.